He is working the clay with his thumbs, and he has been at it a long time. There is a lamp beside him, and the light is low and yellow, and it moves. And every time it moves, the shadows in the clay move too, so that the shape under his hands seems to shift slightly, to settle, to be considering something. His forearms are wet to the elbow. There is a bowl of water at his knee with a film of gray silt across the top of it, and a scatter of tools on the bench. A wooden rib, a length of bronze wire, a boxwood stick worn smooth at one end from being held the same way for 1,000 years. The clay smells of the riverbank it came from, cold and mineral and faintly green. He is not a handsome god, this one. He is the only one of them who limps, the only one who sweats, the only one who has ever been thrown off a mountain, and he is by a long way the best craftsman that has ever existed. He has made thrones that hold whoever sits in them, and tripods that walk to the feast on their own, and dogs of gold and silver that never age and never die and stand at a doorway forever. Tonight, he has been given a commission, and it is stranger than any of those. He has been told to take earth and water and mix them and put in a human voice and human strength and make the shape of a girl, lovely and modest, and with a face like the deathless goddesses. He works up the collarbone with the flat of his thumb. He does the small hollow at the base of the throat with the boxwood stick. He goes back to the mouth twice. And she is not alive yet, and she does not know anything yet, and she is going to be blamed for the condition of the world for the next 3,000 years. Let the light drop where you are. There is nothing here that will startle you, and none of it needs following closely. Because the thing everyone knows about this story is wrong in a small, specific, almost funny way. A slip made by one man once in a book about proverbs 500 years ago, and it has never been corrected in the popular version and probably never will be. There is no box. There was never a box. And what was in the thing that was not a box is stranger and sadder and much more interesting than the version you were told. And the last item in it, the one that stayed, has been argued about by every serious reader of the poem since antiquity, with no agreement whatsoever. And there is a very good case that it is not the comfort we have all assumed it to be. That is where we are going tonight. Slowly, with plenty of stops. Before the smith finishes, one small thing, softly. If these long nights are useful to you, all I like helps this quiet channel reach other people lying awake. And I do like knowing who is out there. Leave your town and the time on your clock in the comments before you drift. And I will read it in the morning. It is a good feeling, seeing the hours scattered all over the map. Now, back to the workshop, and to why anyone wanted this made at all. It starts with a theft, and the theft is not hers. There was a Titan who took the side of the younger gods in the war, and who afterwards took an interest in the small, cold, weak creatures living on the earth without much of anything. And he gave them things. He taught them, in one telling, to count and to write and to yoke animals and to read the seasons. And when the king of the gods withheld fire from them, he went up and stole it and brought it down in the pith of a fennel stalk, which smolders slowly and will carry an ember for miles. You may have heard that story on another night. What matters here is the aftermath, and the aftermath is a decision made in anger about what to do to the people who now had the fire. Not take it back. That is the part worth pausing on. Fire is never taken back. Once it is down here, it stays. And there was an older grievance under the fire, and it is worth 2 minutes because it explains the mood of everything that follows. Before any of this, gods and men had still been on speaking terms, and they met at a place to settle how a sacrifice would be divided, which parts went up in smoke to the gods, and which parts stayed on the table for the people. The forethinker was appointed to carve, and he cheated. He made 2 portions. In one, he put the good meat, all of it, and covered it over with the stomach lining, which is gray and unappetizing and looks like offal. In the other, he put the bones, stripped clean, and laid over them a covering of glistening white fat. Then he invited the king of the gods to choose, and he chose the fat and lifted it and found bones underneath. The poem is careful to say that he saw the trick and knew it and chose anyway. which is one of those saving clauses poets add when the story they inherited makes their god look foolish. Some ancient readers accepted it. Others clearly did not, and said so. Whichever it was, the arrangement stuck. That is the important part. From that day forward, when a Greek family sacrificed an animal, the thigh bones wrapped in fat were burned on the altar for the gods, and the meat was roasted and eaten by the people, which is exactly what they had been doing all along, and what they went on doing for 1,000 years after. That is what the story is for. It is an origin tale for a piece of ritual butchery that everybody in the audience had watched 100 times, standing in a crowd on a feast day, smelling it. And it is a tale in which the gods get the smoke and the bones, and men get the dinner. And the reason is that somebody once wrapped a bad thing in an attractive covering and offered it as a gift. Hold that shape. It is about to happen again, in the other direction. Instead, give them something. That is the punishment. Not a plague, not a flood. A gift. And the poem says outright what the intention was, which is that men should take pleasure in their own misfortune and go on embracing it and be delighted with it. So the smith is told to make her, and the other gods are told to bring things. Look at her now. He has finished the body, and she has been fired, or dried, or changed by some process the poem does not describe, and no one has ever pictured the same way twice, and she is standing on the workshop floor, with the door open behind her, and the daylight coming in. She has the voice and the strength she was promised. She has a face they had to make 3 times, in the way of these stories, because it kept coming out either too much like a goddess or not enough. And she is entirely empty. No history, no habits, no idea what a day is. The gods come in a line to fill her up. The gray-eyed one comes first, and what she brings is work. She teaches her the loom, not decoratively, properly, the way a mother teaches a daughter over years, compressed into an afternoon. How to set the warp. How to hang the loom weights so the tension is even. How to pass the shuttle and beat the weft up with the sword beater. How to keep the selvage straight. You can hear a Greek loom from the next room. It is a standing frame, taller than a woman, leaning against a wall, and the weights are clay donuts hanging in rows, and when the threads are lifted and dropped, the weights knock gently against each other. That sound went on in every house in Greece, all day, for 1,000 years, and it is one of the sounds nobody thinks to imagine when they picture the ancient world. Then the goddess dresses her, a silvery gown, and she arranges it herself, and puts a veil over her hair, embroidered, which the poem calls a wonder to look at. Then the girdle, which is a wide, woven band at the waist, and is the thing a Greek bride is given, and the thing a Greek husband unties. Then the others. The Graces come, 3 of them, and the goddess of persuasion with them. And they put gold necklaces round her neck, one and then another, layered the way real Greek jewelry was worn, chains with pendants, drops shaped like acorns and pomegranates, and each drop rings very faintly against the one beside it whenever she turns her head. Then the seasons come with flowers. This is spring in their hands, crocus and hyacinth and violet, and the wild rose, and narcissus with that heavy sweet smell that fills a whole room from 3 stems. They twist them into her hair. Every one of those flowers appears somewhere else in Greek myth, attached to a girl being taken away from her mother. And every Greek listening would have caught that, and the poet does not stop to explain it. And then the messenger comes, the quick one, the one who moves between worlds, and what he puts in her is not an ornament. He gives her speech. That is his gift. A voice in the sense of language, the ability to say things. And in the same breath, according to the poem, he gives her lies and coaxing words and a nature that takes what it wants. The poet is not kind here. The Greek is blunter than most translations let it be, and he was, by his own account, a man who had been badly used in a legal dispute by his own brother and had opinions about the world. Readers since antiquity have split hard over this passage. Some take it as straightforward misogyny, of a kind that is well attested in that period and not worth defending. Others point out that everything she has just been given, the weaving, the beauty, the jewelry, the persuasion, the speech, is the entire equipment of a bride in that society, and that the poem is describing a marriage and calling it a trap, which says at least as much about the poet's view of marriage as of women. A third group notes that she is made to be irresistible and then blamed for being irresistible, which is a machine, not a character flaw. The poem itself does not resolve it. It just keeps handing her things. And the last thing she is given is a crown. And it is the smith's own work, and it is the most beautiful object in the story. It is gold, and he made it himself by hand for her. The poem is specific about that. And worked into it are all the terrible creatures that the land and the sea hold, a great many of them, worked so finely that they seem to have voice in them, and the whole thing shines. Sit with that a moment. She is being sent down as a punishment, and the God who made her body took the trouble to make her a crown, covered in the entire animal world, so finely you would swear you could hear it. Some readers have taken that as a small private rebellion by the craftsman. Others read it as part of the trap. That the crown is a display, another layer of the lure. And there is a quieter reading that I like, that a maker cannot help making something well, even when he has been told what it is for. Now the name. She is called Pandora, and the name is made of two very common Greek pieces, all and gifts. And it can be read two ways, and both readings are grammatically fine, and this is not a modern quibble. The ancient sources themselves go back and forth. The poem we have been following says the gods named her that because all of them who live on Olympus gave her a gift. All gifted. The one who received everything. But the same construction can go the other way round. All giving. She who gives all gifts. The one who provides. And there is a related name found on a vase and in a lost play and quoted by later writers, which is even clearer. Anisidora. It means she who sends up gifts, and it is not primarily a woman's name. It is a title of the earth. We will come back to that at the end, because it changes the shape of everything. Keep it somewhere in the back of your mind while we go down the mountain. Because now she is finished, and she is led out, and the messenger takes her by the hand and walks her down. Feel the descent with her. It is early morning. The path off the high ground is scree at first, then thyme and low scrub, then a proper track with the marks of goats on it. And the air gets thicker and warmer the whole way and starts to smell of things. Smoke, dung, cut hay, bread. She has never seen a house. She has never seen a person who is not a god. She has a jar with her, or she does not. That is one of the oldest arguments in this material, and I am not going to pretend it is settled. The poem we have does not say where the jar came from. It appears in the story without introduction, the way furniture does. Some tellings have her carrying it down as her dowry, sealed, with instructions not to open it, which is the version the storybooks use, and it makes a tidy tale. Other readers have pointed out that the poem never says any such thing, and that the jar may well have been standing in the house she was brought to, and that a jar standing in a house in that world means one thing and one thing only, which we will get to shortly. What the poem does say is what happened when she was seen. Wonder took hold of everyone, the deathless gods and the mortal men both, when they looked at her. That is the line, not desire, not horror. The word is closer to amazement, the thing that stops you where you stand, and every single thing about her. If you put her in front of a Greek audience, said bride, the veil is a bride's veil. The girdle is the bride's girdle. The gold necklaces and the flowers in the hair are what a girl wore on the one day of her life when she was dressed like that. The gods leading her down and presenting her to a man's house is, beat for beat, the shape of a wedding procession, which was, in that world, a very particular thing. And if you have never pictured one, picture it now, because it is one of the gentlest scenes the period has to offer. It happened at night. That is the first thing. The bride was fetched after dark, and the whole party walked from her father's house to the husband's by torchlight. Pine torches, smoky, dropping sparks, carried by her mother and his. And there were flutes, and people sang the wedding song along the way, and the neighbors came out to watch them go past. She rode in a cart, sitting between the groom and his friend, with the axle creaking and the torches moving alongside. At the door of the new house they were showered with dried figs and nuts and small coins, the way rice or confetti is thrown now, and the same word was used for it as for the scattering of offerings. And then she was led to the hearth, not the bedroom, the hearth, the fire in the middle of the house, and she was walked around it so that the fire would know her, because the hearth was the household itself, and she was now part of it. They ate sesame cakes. There was a particular one made with honey that meant fertility and turned up at every one of these, and the veil came off in front of everyone at a chosen moment. And there was a word for that too, the unveiling. And it was the point at which the woman who had been someone's daughter became a person in a new house with a new set of gods. Every element of that is present in the story we are following, and every element of it is inverted. The torches are not lit by her family because she has no family. There is no father giving her away and no mother carrying the fire. Nobody sings on the road down the mountain. The gifts she brings into the marriage are not linen and jars of oil put by since her childhood. They were made in a workshop the week before by the god who was told to make them. She has no history at all, which is precisely what a marriage in that culture was supposed to be about. Two houses joining, two lines of ancestors, land and property, and obligations going back generations. She is a bride with no behind her. There is a case that this is what the poem finds most disturbing about her, and that the misogyny on the surface is sitting on top of something more specific, an anxiety about a stranger entering a household, which is the actual social fact of virilocal marriage, in which a young woman went to live among people she had not grown up with, holding the keys to the storeroom. The keys to the storeroom. That was a real thing. The mistress of a Greek house held the keys and controlled what came out of the jars and rationed the year. You can see where the story is going before it gets there. Down at the bottom of the track, there is a farm and a man in the doorway of it, and he is the reason all of this works. He has a brother, and the two of them are named for the same thing, going in opposite directions. One of them is the forethinker, the one who works it out beforehand, who sees the shape of a thing while it is still coming, who stole the fire because he had already run the argument to its end. And this one is the afterthinker, the one who understands things once they have happened. His name is a joke, and it is a joke that everyone in the audience got instantly. And it is the same joke we make when we say that hindsight is a wonderful thing. His brother had warned him, explicitly, and more than once, never accept anything sent down from above, whatever it is, however it comes. Send it straight back, because it will be a trouble to everybody down here. And he had agreed. He had understood the reasoning perfectly. Then he sees her standing in his yard in the morning light with flowers in her hair and forgets every word of it and only remembers the warning afterwards when the harm is already in the house. The poem says that exactly. He took the gift and understood it when he already had the evil. There is no seduction scene, no argument, no persuasion. That is worth noticing. He simply accepts, because accepting is what a person does. And then he is a man with a wife and a farm and a jar in the storeroom, and life goes on for a while. How long? Nobody says. The poem gives you no interval at all. She arrives, and then the lid comes off, and the two events sit next to each other with nothing in between. Later tellers filled the gap with a marriage feast, or with weeks of curiosity, or with a whispered instruction from a god. The oldest version leaves it blank. So let us fill it with the house, because the house is where the answer lives. Come in out of the sun. The doorway is low and you have to duck. Inside, it is dim, and it takes your eyes a while, and it is 15 degrees cooler, and the floor is beaten earth, packed hard and swept with a slight give to it. There is a smell in here that has not changed in 3,000 years anywhere in the Mediterranean. Grain dust, dry and slightly sweet. Olive oil, both the fresh green kind and the older kind, going faintly rancid in a corner. Wood smoke in the walls. Dried figs. A cat somewhere. And along the back wall and set into the floor of the room beyond, there are jars. Big ones. This is the thing that needs saying plainly, because the whole story rearranges itself once you see it. The word in the poem is pithos. A pithos is a storage jar the size of a person. Shoulder height on a grown man, sometimes taller. Fat-bellied, narrow at the foot, with a wide mouth and a heavy lid, made of coarse clay with sand and grit worked into it, so it will survive the kiln at that size. And made in one piece by a specialist, coil on coil over weeks, because you cannot throw something that large on a wheel. They were too heavy to move when full, and mostly too heavy when empty. Standard practice was to sink them into the floor up to the shoulder, which kept the contents cool and stopped them tipping. You can walk through the storerooms of a Bronze Age palace on Crete today and see them still standing in their rows, in their sockets, exactly where they were left. They held the year. Grain, olive oil, wine, salted fish, dried beans. Everything a household had put by between one harvest and the next. And the lid was not a lid you flip open. It was a flat stone or a fitted clay disc, and it was tied down through handles with cord. And over the cord, you smeared wet clay, and into the clay, you pressed a seal. A stamped seal on a jar means, nobody has been in this since it was filled. Now think about what a pithos means in a story about how human life became hard. It is the food supply. It is the difference between a family that eats in March and a family that does not. In a world with no other way to preserve anything, the sealed jar in the cool back room is the single most important object a household owns. And opening one at the wrong moment, helping yourself in the winter to what was meant for the spring, is the classic domestic disaster. The same poet who tells this story gives farming advice elsewhere, and one of his lines is about exactly that. Take your fill when the jar is first opened and when it is nearly done, and be sparing in the middle. Meanness at the bottom of the jar, he says, is a poor kind of thrift. They were used for other things too, and both are worth knowing. People lived in them. A famous philosopher, the one who carried a lamp around in daylight, looking for an honest man, made his home in one. Not a barrel, as the story usually goes, but a big broken storage jar lying on its side in a public colonnade in Athens. And people were buried in them. All over the Greek world for centuries, especially children and infants. The body placed inside, curled, and the mouth of the jar sealed, and the jar laid in the ground. A jar is where you put what you want to keep. So, not a box. The box is the fault of one man, and we can name him and date it. In the 16th century, a Dutch humanist, one of the most learned people in Europe, and the man who did more than anyone to put Greek back into Western hands, wrote a huge collection of ancient proverbs with commentaries. When he came to this story, he rendered the Greek word with a Latin one, pyxis, which means a small box, the kind you keep ointment or jewelry in. It comes from the word for boxwood. Whether he slipped or was working from memory or was thinking of a different story entirely, there is a similar tale about a beautiful woman and a small container that she is told not to open, and it is one of the loveliest things in Latin literature. And the container in that one genuinely is a little box. Nobody can prove. Some scholars think he conflated the two. Others think it was simply an error. It did not matter which. His book was read everywhere by everyone for 200 years. Painters read it. Poets read it. The box entered the language, and it has never left. And every dictionary in every European language now defines the phrase in terms of a box. And the picture in your head when you heard the name at the start of tonight had a hinged lid on it. Put it away. Put the whole small pretty casket away. What she is standing in front of, in the cool back room, in the dark, is a clay vessel as tall as her chest, with a stone lid tied down and sealed. Sunk into the floor of a farmhouse, of the kind that holds everything a family has to live on. And her hand is on the cord. Before the lid comes off, look at the world it is going to change, because the poem tells you what it was like, and the description is short and very strange. The tribes of men used to live on this earth apart from evils, and without hard work, and without the grievous sicknesses that bring death. 3 things, and they are worth separating out, because they are not the same thing at all. Apart from evils. Free of the whole category. No malice, no harm coming from anywhere. Without hard toil, not idle but not breaking. The ground gave what it gave without being fought for it, and nobody worked from dark to dark and still came up short. And without the sicknesses that bring death, which does not mean they did not die. Read it carefully. It says the sicknesses that bring death, the wasting kinds, the fevers, the ones that take a person slowly and painfully and out of order. Death itself was already here. Human beings were already mortal. What they did not have was death arriving badly. That is the world about to end. Not paradise, just a life without illness and without grinding work, in which people got old and then stopped, the way the poet describes an earlier race elsewhere. Dying as if going to sleep. Now, the room is dim. The only light comes from the doorway behind her, and there is dust turning slowly in it. Her hands are cool. The clay of the jar is colder than the air, the way a buried thing always is, and where it comes out of the floor, there is a dark ring of damp in the packed earth around it. The cord is old and stiff. The seal has cracked at one edge already, the way dried clay does. The poem does not tell you why she does it. That is the single most important omission in the whole story, and almost nobody notices it. There is no curiosity in the text. There is no temptation scene, no debate, no whispered voice, no forbidden instruction that she breaks. The poem says only that she took off the great lid of the jar with her hands and scattered what was inside and devised miserable cares for men. Everything else, the curiosity, the warning she disobeyed, the hand hovering, the fatal weakness, is later. It is 1,000 years of retelling, layered on by people who needed her to have a motive, because a story in which a woman opens a jar for no stated reason is unbearable to a certain kind of teller. The oldest version simply has her lift a lid, and I would like you to hold both possibilities loosely tonight, because the story holds them loosely too. That she was made to do this and did it, the way a thrown stone falls, or that she was a new person alone in a cold room who wanted to know what was in the jar, which is the most human thing anyone in this story does. The lid is heavy. She gets her hands under the rim and lifts. What comes out does not come out in a rush of shrieking figures. It is worth resisting the paintings here, which are full of bats and demons and swirling black smoke. The Greek says, she scattered them. Think of what happens when you take the lid off a bin of flour too fast. That soft gray bloom that goes up and out and hangs and drifts and is suddenly in the corners of the room and in your hair and on the shelf across the room and cannot be gathered. Cares, hard work, sicknesses, the whole catalog of what makes a life difficult. They go out through the doorway into the light and over the yard and out across the fields, and they do not stop. They spread over the land and over the sea. They fill both. And here is the detail I find genuinely unsettling, and it is one line, and it is the most sophisticated thing in the whole poem. The sicknesses come upon people silently, because the king of the gods took away their voice. Think about what that means as a piece of design. If illness announced itself, if it made a noise on the road, if you could hear it coming up the valley, you could shut the door. You could send the children inside. You could prepare. Instead, it arrives without any sound at all, by day and by night, at random, bringing trouble to people who had no way of knowing. Some readers take that as an explanation of the ordinary experience of being alive, that the catastrophes actually come without warning, and that the poem is simply describing the world as anyone has ever found it. Others read it as the last refinement of the punishment, that the cruelty is not the suffering, but the unpredictability, the impossibility of ever quite being ready. She has the lid in her hands the whole time. The poem never says she is horrified, never says she tries to stop it, never gives her a reaction of any kind. And then, before the jar is empty, the lid goes back on. That is the hinge of the story. Not the opening, the closing. Something is still in there when the great lid comes down on the rim and the mouth is shut. One thing, alone, under the lip, in the dark, in an empty jar in a cool room in a farmhouse. And it stays there, and it does not get out, and it never has. The poem gives it a name, and the name has been fought over for 2,500 years. Elpis. That is the word. 3 syllables. And every English translation renders it as hope. And every English translation is doing you a small disservice, because elpis in Greek does not mean what hope means to us. Our word tilts good. Hope is warm. Hope is the thing you offer somebody. You would not say that a man on trial hopes to be convicted. In English, hope has a direction built in. Elpis does not. Elpis is expectation. It is the forward lean of the mind, the anticipation of what has not happened yet, whatever that is. A Greek writer can use it perfectly naturally for the expectation of something dreadful. Historians use it for the calculations of a general who expects to be attacked. It is closer to what we mean by anticipation, or reckoning on, or the sense of what is coming. And now the question that will not go away. If the jar was full of miseries, and the poem says it was, it says she scattered griefs among men. Then what is expectation doing in there with them? Either it is one of them, or it is not. And the entire meaning of the story flips depending on which. Let me give you the readings. There are 3 main ones, and they have been circling each other since antiquity, and none of them can be knocked out. The first is the one you were taught, and it is the warm one. Everything terrible got out and is loose in the world, and the one good thing was kept, held back, saved, retained for us. Whatever else came to human beings, they kept the ability to expect better. That is why a person who has lost nearly everything still gets up in the morning and puts seed in the ground. The jar was emptied of its poison, and the antidote stayed in the house. There is a real argument in favor of this beyond sentiment, and it is about jars. A pithos is not a prison. It is a larder. It stands in the storeroom of your own house, and everything in it is yours. It is where you keep what you intend to use. Things inside the jar are kept safe. Things that escape a jar are lost. On that reading, the miseries flying out and scattering over the earth are precisely what has been lost control of. And the one thing left under the lid, in your own back room, is the one thing still in your possession. That is a strong argument, and a lot of very good scholars have made it. The second reading is the cold one, and once you have seen it, you cannot unsee it. The lid went on. Whatever is in the jar is shut in. The evils are out here with us. That is why we suffer. And the thing sealed under the stone is therefore precisely what we do not have. On this reading, what humanity was denied is foresight, expectation in its useful sense, the ability to see what is coming and prepare. The illnesses were given silence, so we could not hear them approach, and in the same stroke, we were shut out from the one faculty that would have let us anticipate anything, which makes the ending of the story much bleaker and much more coherent with the rest of it. The punishment is not suffering. The punishment is suffering without warning. And then there's the third reading, which is the one that keeps people up at night. That elpis is in the jar because it belongs there. That it is not the exception among the evils, but the worst of them, kept back not as a mercy but as a reserve, because it is the one that makes all the others last. A 19th century philosopher put this as sharply as anyone ever has. He said that the king of the gods wanted human beings, however tormented, to go on throwing their lives away rather than ending them, and so he gave them hope, which is in truth the worst of the evils, because it prolongs their torture. That is a brutal rating, and he meant it to be. But he did not invent it. It is available in the Greek, and 1 or 2 ancient authors seem to lean that way. And there is a reason that any culture that thinks hard about suffering eventually arrives at the question of whether the expectation of relief is a kindness or a hook. Now let me give you the passage that I think tips the scales, and it comes from a different author entirely, in a play about the Titan who started all of this. He is chained to a rock at the edge of the world, and he is listing the things he did for humanity, and one of them is not fire. He says, "I stopped mortals from foreseeing their own deaths," and the chorus asks him what cure he found for that, and he says, "I settled blind hopes in them," and the chorus says immediately, "That was a great benefit you gave to mortals." Blind hopes, not accurate expectations, blind ones, the inability to see the date of your own death, replaced with a vague and unfounded sense that things will probably be all right. And a 5th century Athenian audience heard that and understood it as a gift. The greatest of the gifts arguably, in a list that includes fire, medicine, writing, ships, and the reading of omens. Because if you could see it, if every person walked around with the day and the manner of their own death fixed in front of them and the deaths of everyone they loved, nobody would plant anything, nobody would build, nobody would have a child. You would sit down and wait. Before we take that further, notice what kind of creature needs it. The gods do not have elpis. They have no use for it. Nothing is uncertain to them in the way it is to us, and nothing ends. There is no last spring for any of them, no final harvest, no year in which the illness does not lift. An immortal does not lean forward into the future, because the future is simply more of the same, and there is an unlimited supply. Expectation is a mortal instrument. It only does anything at all inside a creature that has a limited number of days and cannot see how many. That is why it belongs in this story and not in another one. The poem is not at bottom about a woman or a jar. It is about the moment human life took its present shape. Sickness that comes without warning, work that never finishes, a span that ends. And about the one faculty that makes that shape livable from the inside. Everything that came out of the jar is a consequence of being mortal. The thing left in it is the equipment for being mortal without going mad. You can call that a design and admire it. You can call it a cruelty and resent it. The Greeks did both, often in the same poem. So there is a version of this in which the two stories fit together perfectly, and the fit is the point of tonight. The evils came out because we are mortal creatures in a world we do not control, and they arrive silently because that is genuinely how they arrive. And what remained under the lid, in the house, ours, is the blindness that lets a mortal creature go on living as if it were not one. That is not the same thing as optimism. It is much stranger and much more practical. It is the reason a farmer whose crop failed last year puts the seed in again this year. It is the reason people in the worst circumstances imaginable have gone on making plans for next month. And whether that is a mercy or a trick is not a question the poem answers. It is not a question anybody has answered. The commentaries pile up. The arguments about whether the jar is a container of goods or of evils, whether the ceiling is preservation or deprivation, whether elpis is a blessing that stayed or a curse held in reserve. And the honest position, after all of it, is that the poet gave us 11 lines, and every one of them can be read both ways. It is possible that he did not know either. It is possible that he had noticed something true about being alive, which is that the expectation of better is simultaneously the thing that keeps us going and the thing that keeps us here to be hurt, and that he put it in a jar because that is what you do with something you cannot resolve. And the rest of Greek literature is no help at all, because the Greeks were divided about elpis in exactly the same way. An Athenian lawgiver and poet, writing about a century after our farmer, has a passage listing the ways people make their living: the merchant risking his cargo, the farmer bent over the plow, the craftsman, the seer, the doctor. And he says that all of them go on because of empty expectation. Everyone believes it will come out well. It usually does not. The word he uses is the same word. A tragedian has a chorus sing that hope wanders in and out of many men and is a comfort. And then, in the next breath, that for many it is a deception of light-minded longing, and that a man does not know he was wrong until he has burned his foot. A historian describing a small city arguing about whether to surrender to an overwhelming force has the envoys warn them not to do what people always do, to be led on by expectation when there is nothing solid to expect. He calls it a companion in danger. He also says it ruins people who trust it with everything they have. That is not a culture that had made up its mind. That is a culture circling the same problem for 400 years, arriving each time at the same shrug. And there is a small physical detail that I like better than any of the arguments. On gravestones and in poems about the sea, expectation is sometimes pictured as an anchor, which is exactly right and exactly ambiguous. An anchor is what stops you being carried away in a storm. It is also a heavy thing on a rope that holds you where you are. The lid stayed on. The house was quiet. Outside, the fields looked exactly the same as they had that morning, and nobody in that farmhouse felt anything change, because that is not how it works. Nothing announced itself, nothing made a sound, and the first illness did not arrive for a week or a year. But the story is not finished, because there is another Pandora entirely, older than this one, and she is not a punishment at all. There is a wine cup in the British Museum, painted in Athens about 460 years before our era, and on it there is a woman coming up out of the ground. Only her head and shoulders are above the surface. She is rising, or she is standing in the earth up to her chest, and her hands are raised. On either side of her, there are two figures with hammers. Not weapons. Craftsmen's hammers, the kind used to work stone or to strike a mold. And the two figures are the gray-eyed goddess and the lame smith, the same two who made her. Around them, in some versions of this scene, there are men dancing in costume, in the goat suits of a satyr chorus, celebrating. And on more than one of these vases, the woman coming up out of the earth is labeled. The painter wrote her name beside her head, the way they did, and the name is not Pandora. It is Anisidora, she who sends up gifts. That is an epithet of the earth. It is used of the earth in other contexts by other writers. It belongs to the ground that grain comes out of. And the picture is not a punishment being delivered. It is an emergence, a figure rising out of the soil in spring with two divine craftsmen attending her and a crowd of dancers. Some scholars look at that and conclude there was an older Pandora underneath the poet's version. An earth power, a giver of all things, the one who sends the harvest up out of the ground, who was gradually rewritten into the first mortal woman, and then into the cause of all misfortune. Others are cautious and point out that the vase is later than the poem and could easily be a playful scene from a lost satyr play, of which there was at least one on this subject. What is not in dispute is the direction of the name. There was a phrase in ordinary Athenian speech, quoted in a comedy, in which someone sacrifices to Pandora, the earth, who gives all things. Not a woman, the ground. And there is one more piece of evidence, and it is the largest, the most important statue in Greece, the gold and ivory figure of the city goddess that stood inside the Parthenon, 40 feet high, made by the most famous sculptor of the age, had scenes carved on its base. We know what the scene on that base was because two separate ancient writers mention it. It was the birth of Pandora with the gods attending. Sit with that for a second, because it is not what a punishment gets. On the pedestal of the holiest object in the city, at the feet of the goddess herself, in the temple that the entire empire paid for, this woman being made, with all the gods around her bringing her gifts. That is not the iconography of a curse. That is the iconography of a beginning. There is a long argument about how to square the two, and it will not be settled, and the most sensible position seems to be that the Athenians were quite capable of holding both at once, that she was the first woman and the ancestor of everybody, and the reason life is hard, and the one who comes up out of the earth with her hands full, which, if you think about it, is a fairly accurate description of how most people feel about the world they were born into. Now the last twist, and it is a good one, because there is a version of this story in which the jar was full of blessings. It turns up in the fable tradition, in a short prose piece attached to the name of the storyteller everyone knows for the tortoise and the fox, though the collection under that name accumulated for centuries, and this piece is probably late. It goes like this. The gods collected all the good things, every one of them, every benefit human beings could have, and shut them in a jar and gave the jar to a man to keep. And he could not resist. He lifted the lid to look, and all of it went out and flew straight up and away, back to the gods. And it is with them now, which is why the good things are so scarce down here and so evidently divine when they do appear. And one thing did not get out in time. The lid came down and trapped it inside. Hope, same jar, same lifted lid, same one thing left. And in this version, there is no question at all about what it means. The good things are gone, but we still have the expectation of them sitting in the house, which is the only good thing we did not lose. Two versions, 300 years apart at least, contradicting each other completely on what the jar contained, and agreeing exactly on the ending. That agreement is the most interesting fact in this whole subject. Whatever the jar was full of, everybody who ever told this story wanted the same object to be left in the bottom of it. They could not agree whether it was the last evil or the last good. They could not agree whether being sealed in the jar meant we have it or we do not. But nobody in any version, in any century, ever has the expectation of better get out and fly away with the rest. It stays. It is the only thing that stays. Now let me tell you where this story sits, because we have been reading it as a myth, and it was not written as one. It appears in 2 poems by the same man, and the 2 versions do not match, which is the sort of thing that should be much better known than it is. In the first poem, the one about the origins of the gods, there is no jar, none. She is made and dressed and crowned and brought out among gods and men, and everyone marvels at her. And then the poem simply says that from her comes the race of women, and that they are an affliction to men, and it never mentions a container at all. In that version, she is the jar. The woman herself is the thing that was sent, and the evils do not have to escape from anything, because they arrive in the form of a household, and the poet follows it with a comparison that is the single harshest passage he ever wrote, and I will give it to you because it is famous, and because it tells you a great deal about the man. He says they are like the drones in a hive. The bees work all day, out and back, filling the combs from first light until the sun goes down, and inside, in the shelter of the hive, the drones sit and take what the others have gathered into their own bellies. That is his view of marriage in 11 lines. And then, because he is an honest and rather miserable writer, he immediately admits the other half of it, that a man who avoids marriage to escape all this reaches a bad old age with no one to look after him, and that when he dies, his property is divided up by distant relatives who did not care for him. So there is no way out. Marry and be eaten. Do not marry and die alone with your land carved up by cousins. Later readers have called that passage many things, and most of the words are deserved. It is worth adding what it also is, which is a portrait of somebody deeply unhappy about the arrangements of the world he was born into and unable to imagine any different ones. The second time he tells the story is in the other poem, and this time he is telling it to his brother in the middle of a book about farming. The book is a strange, cranky, beautiful thing. It is addressed to a brother who took more than his share of their father's land, and it contains the story of the 5 ages of the world and a fable about a hawk and a nightingale, and a long stretch of practical advice about when to plow and when to prune, and what kind of wood to use for a plow beam, and how to dress in winter. And the reason the jar story is in there is entirely practical. He is explaining why you have to work. Listen to how he sets it up. The gods keep the means of life hidden from men. If they did not, you could work for 1 day in the year and then sit with your hands folded for the other 364, and the smoke would go up from your fire, and the ox and the mule would be turned out to grass because you would not need them. Hidden. That is the word, the same root as the words for concealing and for the covering of a lid. The livelihood is not gone. It is put away somewhere, out of reach, and the whole of human labor is the business of going and getting it out again, which is what a storeroom is, which is what a sunk jar with a stone on it is. There is a real elegance in that, and I think it is the poet's own and not an accident. The story of how life got hard is a story about a lidded container, told to explain why the year's food has to be dug for and plowed for and carried and stored and rationed. The myth and the object are the same shape. And then he says the line that the whole poem turns on, the one his brother is supposed to take away from all of this. Work. That is it. Work and add work to work, and the barns will fill. Not a curse to be lamented, a condition to be got on with. The other thing to say, and then we can let the argument go entirely, is what happened to her afterwards. She had children. That is in the tradition, and it is almost never mentioned. A daughter in most versions who married the son of the fire thief, and the two of them are the couple who survive the flood in the Greek version of that story and repopulate the earth by throwing stones over their shoulders. So she is the ancestor. Everyone is descended from her. The line runs through the jar, and over the following 2,500 years, she became something much flatter than she started as. The woman who could not resist, the curious wife, the pretty catastrophe. The paintings show her at the moment of lifting the lid with a guilty expression on her face, an expression the text never gives her. People often reach at this point for the comparison with another first woman in another tradition, the one with the fruit and the garden, and the two stories do have things in common. A woman, a prohibition, or something like one, and a world that gets harder afterwards. The comparison is worth handling carefully. The similarities are real, and scholars have written about a shared inheritance of Near Eastern storytelling. The differences are also real, and one of them is very large. In this Greek version, there is no commandment. Nobody in the oldest telling tells her not to open the jar. There is no rule, and therefore no disobedience, and therefore, strictly speaking, no sin. She is a manufactured being, sent as a punishment for something a titan did, who lifts a lid in a dark room for reasons the poet declined to give her. Whatever that is, it is not the same story. Some readers have argued that the two got read into each other during the centuries when educated Europeans knew both texts by heart, and that the guilty, curious, tempted Pandora of the paintings is a hybrid, a Greek figure wearing an expression borrowed from somewhere else. That seems likely to me. And it is one more layer of the same process that gave her the box, a very old story, handled by a great many hands, each of which left a thumbprint. Underneath all the prints, the shape is simpler than any of them. A made thing, put into a house, a lid lifted, the year's supplies scattered, and one item left in the bottom of the jar in the dark that everybody in every century agreed had to stay there. So let us put the argument down and go back into the house one last time, because it is evening there now, and the room has changed. The doorway is a rectangle of blue. The dust that was turning in the light this afternoon is settled. Somewhere out in the yard, a dog rearranges itself and sighs. She is at the loom against the wall. The weights knock together, a small, irregular clicking as the threads lift and fall, and then a pause while she passes the shuttle. And then the soft thump of the beater going up. Knock, pause, thump. It is not a rhythm you could set a clock by. It is the rhythm of somebody doing something with their hands while thinking about something else. The man is outside, sharpening something, and the sound of that carries too. Long strokes, unhurried, with a rest at the end of each one. And in the back room, in the dark, the jar stands in its socket in the floor with the lid on. It is cool in there. It is always cool in there. The clay of the shoulder is faintly damp to the touch, and the earth around the base is darker than the earth of the rest of the floor, and there is that smell of grain dust and old oil that gets into the walls of a storeroom and never comes out. If you go in and put your hand flat on the lid, there is nothing to feel. No hum, no warmth, no sense of anything. It is a stone on a jar in a farmhouse. That is the thing about this story that stays with me. Whatever is under there, it is not dramatic. It is not glowing. It is in a back room in an ordinary house, behind a curtain next to the beans. They will use that jar again. That is the part the paintings never show. A pithos is not thrown away because something happened once. It is far too valuable, and it took a specialist a month to make, and it will hold this family's grain for 3 generations, and then hold somebody's bones. In the autumn, they will lift the lid off and start filling it. Outside the door, the world is exactly as difficult as it now is. There will be a bad fever in the village some winter, and it will arrive without a sound. There will be years when the rain does not come at the right time. There will be work every day for everyone, forever, which is the condition the poem was written to explain to a man who did not want to accept it. And there will be spring, and the seed will go in. That is the whole argument in one gesture, and no one has ever improved on it. A person who knows exactly how bad it can get, kneeling in a cold field in February, putting seed in the ground for a harvest they cannot see and cannot promise. Whatever that is, the mercy or the trick, the last gift or the last evil, it is still in the house. Let the fire go down now. Let the loom fall quiet. She has tied off the row and hung the shuttle on its peg. Feel the day cooling off the walls, the stone lid in the dark room, the packed earth floor, the cool clay, the jars in their rows in the storerooms of a palace on an island 400 miles south that will still be standing there, empty, in 3,500 years. Exactly where somebody set them down. There is nothing you need to open tonight, and nothing you need to decide. The lamp has that low, steady flame it gets at the very end, when the oil is nearly gone and the wick has stopped guttering. Out beyond the doorway, the sky has gone from blue to nearly black, and the first stars have come out over the hill, and the air smells of clay and cold grass and the smoke of a fire that is going out. Breathe once, slowly, and let it go. Sleep well.